I've taken on Dennis Prager before, and I even like the guy to a certain degree because he's one of the lesser offensive theists out there, even though he still has absurd beliefs. So when he came up with this video claiming that morality requires God, I just had to take a look and find out what he's doing wrong this time. Because when it comes to religion, Prager's wrong a lot more than he's right. So let's dive deep into Prager's claim that if there was no God, murder isn't wrong, and why he's just out of his mind.
Do you believe that good and evil exist?
Well, it depends on what you mean by that. If you mean objectively, then no, not really. Subjectively, sure. People can make up their own determination on the existence and qualities of good and evil. There's nothing wrong with that. It only becomes wrong when people pretend that their determination is the only determination that matters, and everyone else has to play along or else.
The answer to this question separates Judeo-Christian values from secular values. Let me offer the clearest possible example. Murder. Is murder wrong?
Define wrong. Is it against the law in most places? Absolutely. Does it warrant punishment in those places where murder has been enshrined in law as wrong? Damn straight. Because that's really all right and wrong are. Societal decisions on what will and will not be acceptable within that society. Wrong is wrong because people say so, not because your imaginary friend does.
Is it evil? Nearly everyone would answer yes.
No, not really. Evil's just a label you can throw on something. And I love how he says everyone would always answer yes, when I just answered no. Evil is solely in the eye of the beholder.
But now I will pose a much harder question. How do you know?
Enlightened self-interest. I don't want to be murdered, therefore I don't murder others, nor do I allow others to be murdered in hopes that this general societal standard will come back to benefit me in the end. Wow, that was easy.
I'm sure you think murder is wrong, but how do you know?
You can't know because it isn't objectively wrong, and knowledge only applies to objective propositions. I don't pretend to have knowledge that I cannot possibly have, nor do I need to have knowledge for things that knowledge simply doesn't apply to. Why do you?
If I asked you how you know that the Earth is round, you would show me photographs from outer space or offer me measurable data.
Because that's an objective fact. The planet is, in fact, spherical. We have evidence that supports that conclusion.
But what photographs could you show? What measurements could you provide that prove that murder or rape or theft is wrong? The fact is, you can't.
Because none of those things are objective. They're just commonly held social opinions, held by the majority of people for the reasons I gave earlier. Now, people might invent other explanations for how they've come to those conclusions, and God's one of the most invented explanations, but they simply cannot demonstrate that their inventions actually have any legitimate validity.
There are scientific facts, but without God, there are no moral facts.
You say that like it's a bad thing. Just because you're emotionally comforted by that thought doesn't make that thought objectively true. Your comfort is meaningless to factual reality, and that's something that theists and other emotionally overactive people just don't like.
In a secular world, there can only be opinions about morality.
In any world, there are only opinions about morality. Just because you want to believe otherwise doesn't actually mean anything.
They may be personal opinions or society's opinions, but only opinions.
And that's true. So what? You simply have an emotional desire for there to be an objective morality, and that doesn't mean that one actually exists. Your wishes and dreams mean jack squat.
Every atheist philosopher I have read or debated on this subject has acknowledged that if there is no God, there is no objective morality. Judeo-Christian values are predicated on the existence of a God of morality. In other words, only if there is a God who says murder is murder wrong?
Well, that just makes them wrong. Okay, is that supposed to be some kind of a surprise?
Otherwise, all morality is opinion. The entire Western world, what we call Western civilization, is based on this understanding.
It's based on a belief which has no rational validity. This claim is just a fallacy. It doesn't matter what Western civilization believes or what it's founded on. It says nothing whatsoever about whether that belief or foundation is actually true.
Now, let me make two things clear. First, this doesn't mean that if you don't believe in God, you can't be a good person. There are plenty of kind and moral individuals who don't believe in God and Judeo-Christian values.
Well, good, because most atheists, at least in my experience, are better people than most theists, again in my experience. The more evangelical you are in your beliefs, the less of a good person you are. You don't see atheists strapping on bomb vests and killing innocents in the name of their non-religion.
But the existence of these good people has nothing to do with the question of whether good and evil really exist if there is no God.
Explain that to me. How can people be good without your imaginary friend if good doesn't exist without God? That makes no sense at all.
Second, there have been plenty of people who believed in God who were not good people. Indeed, more than a few have been evil and have even committed evil in God's name.
Well, tons of them, in fact. Far more people have been killed in the name of supposed gods than in the name of no gods.
The existence of God doesn't ensure people will do good. I wish it did.
It doesn't really do anything at all. In fact, the problem of evil is a good challenge to people who claim that the gods are omnipotent, omniscient, and omnibenevolent. These characteristics, taken together, are impossible based on the way that the world actually works.
The existence of God only ensures that good and evil objectively exist and are not merely opinions.
Something you still haven't demonstrated, which of course is no surprise.
Without God, we therefore end up with what is known as moral relativism, meaning that morality is not absolute, but only relative to the individual or to the society.
And what's wrong with that? Because that's exactly what we see in the real world. There's not one single moral precept that you can point to that's been consistent across all cultures and throughout time. Not one. So, where is this moral objectivity that you speak of? Where's the evidence that it exists?
Without God, the words good and evil are just another way of saying I like and I don't like.
Well, that's morality in a nutshell. Just because you don't like that fact doesn't stop it from being a fact.
If there is no God, the statement murder is evil is the same as the statement I don't like murder.
Okay, I don't like murder. So we're right back to enlightened self-interest, the core of any system of morality. What's your point?
Now, many will argue that you don't need moral absolutes. People won't murder because they don't want to be murdered.
There you go.
But that argument is just wishful thinking.
No, it's actually reality. Of course, you do get people who do murder, which is usually an emotional, not a rational act, just like believing in gods is an emotional, not rational act.
Hitler, Stalin, and Mao didn't want to be murdered, but that hardly stopped them from murdering about 100 million people.
Did any of them actually commit any murders themselves, or did they just order the murders of many people? I really don't know the answer to that. I'm just posing that as a question. And Hitler murdered the Jews because he believed God told him to do so. So much for moral absolutes, I guess.
It is not a coincidence that the rejection of Judeo-Christian values in the Western world by Nazism and communism led to the murder of all these innocent people.
Except it didn't. You know, all those Nazis out there wearing belt buckles that read God with us proves you've got no clue what you're talking about. And even communism adopted religious values and used the church to control the people. So, yeah, not so much.
It is also not a coincidence that the first societies in the world to abolish slavery, an institution that existed in every known society in human history, were Western societies rooted in Judeo-Christian values.
many of which adopted slavery in the first place because of so-called Judeo-Christian values. The earliest slaves in America were held because Christians thought the blacks were inferior, being the descendants of Ham. While Christians certainly did work to end slavery, it was primarily the Catholics who pushed it, not Protestants. And of course, Jews certainly took place in the African slave trade, transporting slaves from Europe to the Americas. They did a significant slave trade in Brazil, where Jews owned massive plantations. I really don't think I'd be pretending to be on the right side of history here, Dennis.
And so were the first societies to affirm universal human rights, to emancipate women, and to proclaim the value of liberty.
Of course, that was done where secularism had largely set in. In America, for instance, the majority of anti-suffragists were Christians who felt that giving women equality would go against God's will. Likewise, opposition to black civil rights has always been a Christian movement. The KKK is and has always been a Christian organization. And who can forget the recent opposition to gay marriage that comes almost entirely from the religious right? It's funny how Prager doesn't mention any of those facts.
Today, the rejection of Judeo-Christian values and moral absolutes has led to a world of moral confusion.
Well, not for anyone who actually understands morality. See, the real reason people push the objective morality nonsense is because it's easier to declare that there is an objective moral code than it is to actually defend their subjective views all the time. So they pretend that all those things that they want are also wanted by some all-powerful guy in the sky, and therefore everyone else is wrong. Sorry, reality doesn't actually work that way.
In the New York Times in March 2015, a professor of philosophy confirmed this. He wrote, "What would you say if you found out that our public schools were teaching children that it is not true that it's wrong to kill people for fun? Would you be surprised? I was."
Yeah, I'd say you'd have to present video of that happening in a large number of schools, which we all know you can't do.
The professor then added, "The overwhelming majority of college freshmen view moral claims as mere opinions."
Well, good for them. It means they're actually getting something out of their time in college. But of course, that's not actually making society worse, is it? Because violent crime rates have been dropping since the 90s. Oh yeah, and religiosity's been falling too. Coincidence? I think not.
So then, whatever you believe about God or religion, here is a fact. Without a God who is the source of morality, morality is just a matter of opinion.
Again, you say that like it's a bad thing. Your so-called fact is just wrong. Morality really only matters over an entire society. Each individual doesn't just make up their own moral code and ignore everyone else. Societies hold people accountable to the larger moral views through the passage of laws and the introduction of penalties and punishment for violating those laws.
So, if you want a good world, the death of Judeo-Christian values should frighten you.
No, it shouldn't. Then we might get rid of all the absurdity that Christians and Jews and Muslims and all the other religions push. I want reality. I recognize reality for what it is. You ought to try that sometime.
I'm Dennis Prager.
And once again, you're wrong. See, just because the majority of people living in a nation are supposedly Christian, that doesn't make it a Christian nation. We live in a constitutionally guaranteed secular country. The laws are secular in nature. The morality is secular in nature. And it's entirely subjective. Some imaginary friend in the sky didn't make it up. We function better that way. This is just another example of someone who favors their beliefs over reality. They're so convinced that their ideology must be correct that they don't bother to even look at the evidence right in front of their faces. If morality were objective, we'd expect to see things that are quite different than what we actually see. We'd expect to see people behaving very differently than how they actually behave. And because of this, theists simply rationalize their way around reality so they can keep believing things that make no rational sense. And then they're surprised that anyone ever doubts them. I'm not surprised, and you shouldn't be either. What surprises me is that there are so many stupid theists in the world, but that's changing, and it's not a moment too soon for that.